It's been said that it takes about 7 seconds to make a good first impression. So whenever you introduce yourself to somebody new, think about that 7 seconds. How much can be said? What can be done? In this class, you will give 2 speeches, the first being the introduction speech. For the introduction speech, your entire goal is to make sure that your classmates know a little bit more about you than what they did before. In this particular lecture video, we're going to talk about what content you'll need and how to structure your speech. So you may be wondering, well, what are the requirements for my introduction speech? That's a great question. Your speech will need to be 2 to 3 minutes long. Make sure that you end up in that window of 2 to 3 minutes. If you're at 1:45 or 3:15, you will have gone under or over your speech. You need to make sure that you fit your time. Remember that the entire purpose is simply to introduce yourself. There's no need to tell your entire life story. You're just getting a gist of who you are out there to your audience. You will need a speaking outline. What do I mean by speaking outline? Simply just have notes. They can be on a piece of paper or note cards, whichever way best works for you. But make sure that you have notes up there at the podium with you. And then lastly, make sure you use one of the following methods to frame your speech. You can choose from the object analogy approach, the significant or memorable event approach, or the interview question approach. If you choose the object analogy, simply you're comparing yourself to an object. It can be a cloud, it can be your favorite toy, it can be a clock, it can even be an animal. I know technically some people say animals aren't objects, but you can use an animal for this case as well. And then tell a story that relates to that particular analogy. So let's say your life is like a 3-ring circus, where one ring is your family, another ring is your work schedule, and the last ring is your school. So in that speech, I would expect you to tell us a little bit more about how your family, work, and school life make your life circus-like. Maybe you want the significant or memorable event approach. If you choose this one, remember you can choose a funny event, it can be a moment when you traveled, it can be your greatest accomplishment, or even an if you only knew story. It just has to be any moment in your life that was a highlight. Keep in mind to give a little bit of backstory of how you led up to that particular moment and tell us how it made you feel. Common significant memorable event approach speeches usually end up being birth of first child, graduation day, going on a fantastic trip. Really, the sky's the limit here. If the other 2 don't appeal to you, you could easily pick the interview question approach. If you pick the interview question, pick only one of the following questions. You may decide, well, I want to tell people about my greatest strength. Make sure that you provide examples. Don't just say my greatest strength is that I'm determined and not tell us how you're determined, or show us stories from your past where you were very determined. Make sure that you have those examples to back up what you're saying. You could decide, well, I want to frame my speech as, why should we hire you? In this case, your audience would be the potential employer. Tell them about all the good things about you and how you would be a great employee. Another one would be, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So this is your way of letting your audience know your goals for either your personal life, maybe even your work life and future career goals. The sky's the limit again on this one. I did have one student say, well, can I do it in 10 years? Yes. If you would rather do where do you see yourself in 10 years, then fine. That is also awesome. After you pick a method, start to think about, well, should I consider my audience? The short answer is yes. Make sure that you analyze your information. Make sure that you check that all the information that you're sharing is appropriate. Number one, you don't want to talk over your audience, you want to talk to your audience. And additionally, you don't want to tell a story that may make people feel uncomfortable. So, in some ways, you may have to adapt your words. Maybe using simpler language, avoiding slang, or even having to explain complicated terms. Now here's a big facet of what you should do for the speech. How should you structure it? Just like with any paper that you've probably written for a composition class, you're going to have an introduction, body, transitions, and your conclusion. This structure is what I refer to as macro structure, and you'll see it again. So for your introduction, you'll have the attention getter and your thesis preview. The body will consist of your first main point, then you'll have your transition, and then your body will come back in the second main point. Then you'll have your conclusion, which will wrap up with the thesis review and the clincher. So this is the order of all those different parts. But you're probably wondering, well, what are those different parts? What do they mean? Well, let's start with the introduction. Golden rule number 1 is never start with your name, topic, or title of your speech. Go straight into your attention getter. Now, an attention getter can be any statement or question that pulls your audience in. It gets the audience's attention. So that question could be a rhetorical question, or it can be an actual question you want to ask. It can be a statistic. It can be a funny story. I always caution people about joke telling. You may not be as funny as you think you are, but if you are pretty funny, then go ahead and have a joke attention getter. Now, after you say your attention getter, that is a great place to say your name and to get the audience to know who you are a little bit better. Then, have your thesis preview. In your thesis preview is where you're actually going to tell the audience what your speech is about. So let's go back to the circus example. My life is like a 3-ring circus. Immediately, that's your thesis. Your preview part would be, 1 ring is my family, another ring is my work, and the last ring is my school. That's the preview part. Now your audience will know that main point 1 should be about the family, main point 2 should be about work, and main point 3 should be about school. Keeping in mind that the entire introduction's purpose is to pull the audience in and then help orient them to where you're going. So think of your attention getter as the person waving you down to catch a ride, and the thesis preview being the roadmap of how to get where they need to go. Now, to help formulate your thesis preview, you could use this method, the Keep It Super Simple method. It simply is a fill-in-the-blank type of method, where you could say, to help you better maybe understand, comprehend, value, whatever verb really fits there. And then putting your speech topic. It could be my life, or my work, or my upbringing, whatever your speech is about. Then you say, I will maybe explain, discuss, again, pick a verb that best suits you. Your main point 1 and main point 2. So here's an example. To help you better understand why I am a good candidate, I will explain my work ethic and my collaboration skills. You see that this one is the interview question approach. They decided why should we hire you was the best one for them. And so they're going to explain the work ethic and collaboration skills in their speech, with work ethic being main point 1 and collaboration skills being main point 2. Here we have another example. It reads, I am like a rock because I have been shaped by hard times and have become stronger. Keep in mind that this is not exactly the KISS method verbatim, but you see the structure still playing out here. The speech topic being that this person is like a rock, so they obviously picked the object analogy approach. And then hard times, main point 1, and how those hard times made them stronger will be explained in main point 2. And here's another example. Let me tell you about the journey I took to reach the proudest day of my life, graduation day. So here, if we look around and we figure out, okay, well, the speech topic is really graduation day. But main point 1 will be the journey I took, and main point 2 will be the proudest day of my life. Again, the order is a little bit different, but we know where this person is going. So after you said your introduction, being your attention getter and your thesis preview, go ahead and move into your main points. First main point will be the main point that you mentioned in your thesis preview. So, for example, the journey I took. So at this time, I would tell people about maybe my high school experience or some of the crazy things I experienced while trying to get to graduation day. Then I would have my transition. Keep in mind we're going to come back to transition, so keep that in the back of your mind. After we transition, we would go into the second main point, which is the proudest day. So I would explain what exactly made graduation the proudest day of my life. I could include stories about how my family felt about me, how happy I was to have everyone I loved surrounding me and congratulating me, or how good it felt to finally make it. So remember, we had those two main points, with main point 1 being the journey I took, and main point 2 being the proudest day. A good transition to show movement in between those two stories would be, while the journey wasn't easy, it was worth it to reach my proudest day. Realize here that we have main point 1, journey, and main point 2, the proudest day, being connected in one sentence. That's what a transition does. It moves from main point 1 to main point 2 very gradually so your audience knows, hey, we're moving. Think of a transition as your GPS system. The same way your GPS says, take a left. Well, the transition is now saying, move on from main point 1 to main point 2. And then lastly, you have your conclusion. In your conclusion, you will have your thesis review, where you simply restate your main idea, your thesis preview, but in past tense. So I've explained to you why graduation day was one crazy journey, but yet the proudest day of my life. See what I did there? I still have my main points and my speech topic put into that thesis review, just reminding the audience of where I just took them. And then I have my clincher. The clincher is a statement that relates back to the attention getter. In relating back to the attention getter, it echoes something that you said there. So for example, I had one student and she said, for her attention getter, I've always wanted to be a blue person. Immediately we thought, okay, that's weird, that's different. And then she explained how her favorite movie, Avatar, was a big aspect of her life. So when she got to her clincher, she said, now you know why I've always wanted to be a blue person. Immediately it brought us back to the idea that she started off in her attention getter with. So do that exact same thing. Whatever you start saying and mentioning in your attention getter, echo back to it. If you have a statistic from the past, bring that statistic to the future in your clincher. If you have part of a story in your attention getter, finish that story in your clincher. If you have a question in the attention getter, maybe re-ask that question in your clincher. Now remember, this is only a facet of your life. Do not tell your entire life story in the speech. You shouldn't be able to tell your entire life story in 2 to 3 minutes anyway. Also, do not get preachy with a moral of the story. Remember, you're just introducing us to who you are. You're not trying to persuade everybody that, yes, everyone should go get an education because graduation day was the proudest day of your life. Keep the focus on you. Also, do not skip practicing your fully prepared speech, because practice helps make everything better. So remember, this speech will need to be 2 to 3 minutes long. The entire purpose is simply to introduce yourself. Only use one method. Choose the object analogy, the significant or memorable event, or the interview question. Not all of them. And organize your speech into those 4 parts: introduction, body, transitions, and conclusion.